I'm going to take you through 6 things that I think are really critical as a healthcare entrepreneur that I've learned over my time in the space. And then I have one shameless plug at the end. It will be very, very obvious which is the shameless plug, I promise. This is me, so if you want to say something inflammatory about pirates or Tourette syndrome and put it on Twitter, you can associate that with me. There's my Twitter handle at the top. But this is pretty boring, but it just tells you the story of why is it worth listening to me about anything other than the free pizza. And I've been doing this for a long time, about 15 years. The first FDA home monitoring 510K has my name on it. The best products of 2000, which makes me feel really old at this point, because it says 2000 on it. There was a time that was new, of course. And my time with Rock Health, after building this company called Health Hero Network, which we grew to be the largest remote patient monitoring company in the world at the time. We sold it, and I retired for about 4 years, and worked with Rock Health and the FDA and a bunch of other organizations, kind of dedicating myself to digital health. So to be blunt, that's what I want on my gravestone. What I'd like on my gravestone is, that guy helped out in digital health. And so my invitation to you at the end of this is come find me. Let's talk about stuff. Me talking to you isn't as useful as us talking. So you should feel free to interrupt me. You should feel free to ask a lot of questions. And you should feel free to come up afterwards and let's talk about this stuff. Because honestly, this is what I care about. And this is, if there's such a thing as my life's work, this is it. And don't tell my daughter that I said that. So one more thing, this is what excites me. So if you think of healthcare as this continuum across 4 major sectors, moving from the wellness sector on one side, I guess I should go this way, all the way to kind of the medical side, the last 3 sections are what really excites me. That's not because there's anything wrong with wellness, but I think we keep extending the definitions of health, especially in the entrepreneur community, in a way that we could move in lots of different ways to extend it without saying, well, I just want to avoid hard problems. I want to avoid payers. I want to avoid regulatory. I want to avoid all these things. That direction, moving that way, that's where the money is. And that's where the people need you the most. The person that needs you isn't that person that has their Adidas outfit on or their Nike outfit on and their Fuel Band on, and I have one of those on, right? But I don't need healthcare, and I don't need you. I don't mean that rudely, but there are people out there that need each of you as entrepreneurs to make a difference in healthcare. Those people need you. And that's where the change needs to happen, more than any other sector, right? So there's nothing wrong with wellness. I think there's a lot of great things in that category, right? But the real people that need you, and where the money actually is the other part of that spectrum. So let's dive into that in some detail, right? First thing, regulatory is not the enemy. Next time any person says to you that, that's the obligatory slide, so you have something to look at that looks legalese, right? Next time somebody says to you, oh, the FDA, oh, HIPAA. Imagine a world where TrueVault couldn't have stood up here and given you an amazing 5-minute presentation because they had to spend all 5 minutes trying to explain what it meant to be compliant, right? They couldn't tell you what those 18 things are that matter. They couldn't tell you about the security rule. They couldn't tell you about process, right? The regulatory is not the enemy, right? And anybody that tells you that the FDA is the enemy, ask them one simple question. Have you ever done a 510K? Have you ever done a PMA? And I would almost guarantee you that every single person that will tell you that the FDA stifles innovation has just never done it. Because if you care about quality, if you care about good process, if you care about a reporting with your customers, all things where you would just use different words, then the FDA is not a threat, right? I've done 7 510Ks. I've been audited twice. I got a warning letter. I can admit I got a warning letter, because that's the last company. We already sold that one. But I've gotten a warning letter, right? These aren't things that you should run from. These are ways and guidelines to help you run your business that you're only going to see in things like the financial services, right? Most other industries don't have guidelines like that. Don't have ways to say what's acceptable security. You'll hear a bunch of BS like industry standard, right? So running from these things or saying, oh, they kill innovation, or they this, or they that, look harder. Ask a harder question, because it's actually, find someone. I will help you. That's, I already gave you my Twitter handle and my email's at the end. I will help you. I'll either introduce you to a consultant or I would help you, because otherwise, we're going to end up with the junk that's on Indiegogo now. How many people are familiar with the Healby controversy? So there's this whole controversy about, on Indiegogo, I'm not going to go into the whole thing right now, about whether this device, they raised $1 million, whether this device can read your caloric intake through your skin. Now, anybody in here that's done any glucose monitoring over the years is thinking, what? $1 million they raised. That's what's going to happen to our industry if we don't, as the entrepreneurs and as the leaders, say, you know what, maybe regulatory isn't the worst thing in the world. Maybe the idea of holding ourselves to a higher standard and demanding other people in our space do the same, we can actually be leaders, right? So if you're interested, I can send out a link and we can talk more about that. But that idea of silicon snake oil is, we're on the cusp. Consumers don't believe in us yet, right? They don't believe their pedometer works. They've been only given things by their payers, which means they've been given nothing, right? Just because all of you believe in digital health doesn't mean anybody is ready to believe in that yet. And those kind of companies are going to ruin it for all of us. Unless anybody here is from that company, I apologize in advance. But so. The second thing is the global allure. And I think one of the things I see happen with entrepreneurs all the time, and I've probably worked with a couple hundred now, maybe 200 different startups, is that they say, okay, we've got the United States. The United States is done. Let's go to Europe. Let's go to Japan. Let's go somewhere else. In fact, they'll probably convince themselves to go to those markets because they think the regulatory environment's going to help them more in those environments. This is not one market, right? Healthcare is a state-by-state, states' rights kind of issue, right? And so get really good at your backyard before you worry about going international. Because if you think you can't get enough people in California, why do you think you're going to do better in the Netherlands? Unless you're David Hasselhoff going to Germany, stay here. Get the job done, right? There is 50 unique markets, right? Telemedicine in Wyoming is actually amazing. If you look at the things they've done in Wyoming in telemedicine, and how often do people say the sentence, oh, Wyoming is amazing, right? But in telemedicine, it is amazing what they have done. It's its own market with its own needs. It is completely different than serving New York, right? You have enough complexity to stay here. The other reason for that, there we go, is people assume all the time that, and for the engineers in the room, you'll know what I mean. I'm just going to have my localization files. I'm going to bundle them up. I'm in every language. Congratulations, welcome to the United States. Okay? If you want to sell telemedicine products, remote patient monitoring products to any government in the United States, you want to go and sell them to the city of New York, right? Not the state, just the city, right? Russian, don't tell me you're not going to do 2-byte. Chinese, right? All kinds of languages that you have to do inside the United States. So don't mistake translation with internationalization, right? And so you have to support multiple languages because you're going to serve those countries, the United States, and each of those 50 states, right? And I see people all the time who want to do something in Dubai, they want to do something in Japan, and that's usually because it's hard. It's hard to get customers. And so anybody who's interested, you'll say, well, I'll go do that. And I say this to you because I fell into that trap twice. I went across the Atlantic and fell into that trap, and then, to make it better, I went across the Pacific and made the same mistake. So I say that to you as a moron who made that mistake twice. And we actually did we fell on our face like you could not imagine in Japan. I can't even describe it to you without crying, right? And that was hubris. That was fear of the market in the US on my part, and led my company almost off a cliff by going international way too fast. So again, you're going to get tempted because people are going to see it. Healthcare is a global issue. You're going to see a heart failure patient and go, I know how to fix heart failure patients, right? you know probably a lot about heart failure. But getting into and establishing yourself in another market, unbelievably hard. So you will get tempted by this, and I would urge you not to fall for the trick. Number 3, the death march, we've got a pilot. I'm not even gonna ask, because it will be every single person in the room, all right? 100-person pilot, I got a 100-person pilot. I'm the 900th person this week to get a 100-person pilot with Kaiser. We're done, it's great. Right? We've all been in this trap, right? The pilot trap. And it's really challenging when you're thinking about enterprise and enterprise sales versus consumer sales. We'll get into both of them a little bit. But in this particular case, like, know how many pilots you need to learn what you need to learn and demand more from your customers. You do not need to do a pilot with everyone. They're going to tell you you do, right? But remember what you need to get out of it. Because an unpaid 100-person pilot doesn't impress investors, doesn't impress your staff, and if it's the 18th time you've done it, how much are you actually learning? So I have a corollary rule, which when you're doing sales like this, is the length of your sales cycle is directly proportional to the number of fountains outside the building. So this is about a 6-month cycle, right? If you go to a building with 8 or 12 of these, a couple of years, right? And it's a long cycle. And if at the end of that you've got a 100-person unpaid pilot you learn nothing from, you did it wrong, right? You owe better to your investors and you owe better to your staff, right? And it's okay for you to fire customers, and it's okay for you to demand more from the people that you're going to work with, right? Find the people that actually drive change. But these sales cycles, these are unbelievably painful. When they're not fruitful, it was a waste of time. When they're fruitful, when they're fruitful, they make your business. We almost gave up on the Veterans Administration. Like, you want to talk about, they don't have any fountains, they just have a big brick wall you got to climb over, right? It's just unbelievable. And I will tell you, the Veterans Administration made our company, right? I mean, made the company. That and the patent portfolio. I won't pretend it was anybody else. National Health Service was nice, all that stuff was nice. The VA made the company, right? And I was this close to giving up. There was other people in our company that kept driving that forward because they could define, and I kept saying yes because they could say, this is what we want to learn, this is the opportunity, and it's worth it. So I'm not saying don't fight hard, but don't fight hard just for a pilot. Because I have not seen a slide deck. I swear to God, if any of you show me a pitch deck with this in it, I will cry out loud. And you do not want to do that. I mean, we don't know each other that well, but please don't do that to me, right? If you have a Stanford logo, a Harvard logo, a UCSF logo, or a Kaiser logo, and you want to show me that slide as a pilot or advisor deck, please, for both of us, don't, okay? Because every single goddamn startup has that slide, right? Tell me what you learned, tell me who you're working with, tell me how it's going to work, right? Don't just throw a logo of the institution that everyone in the Bay Area has some connection to and has on their slide deck, right? It doesn't differentiate you. And if you can't articulate to me how it's learned, I don't want to spend that time, all right? Because you haven't yet figured out what you want to get out of that relationship. Spend the time, focus on those people that you want, and be able to articulate not the brand, but what you're going to do with them. The other thing I would want to hear from you, if you're pitching me, either as an to invest or to be an advisor or anything else, is if you have figured out where in the try versus buy cycle, all right? This is an incredible skill. I would not argue I'm good at it. In fact, let's be frank, I'm bad at it, right? But I surround myself with people who are really good at figuring out this guy who tells us all day he loves us but's never going to sign a deal. And the person who is actually going to do something with you meaningful. So again, when you're thinking about the pilot cycle and how those things are going to work, it is so okay. And you will be so respected by your investors and your advisors and your staff when you say, you know what? That person's fishing. They're going to do 50 people. They're not going to publish. We're not going to learn anything. We're not doing it. And it's okay. Because when you can figure out the difference between that person and the person who's going to write you a check, then you've started to make it in enterprise sales and healthcare. So this is one that's particularly close to my heart. There is a healthcare consumer. We all just ignore them, right? It is the patient. And it is absolutely changing, right? And whether you heard it here first or you already believe it, the rise of the consumer in how healthcare is consumed and paid for and purchased, we are at the tip of a really fascinating wave. Whether it's a do-yourself kind of crowd, or a crowd that's been in a high deductible plan that now has to figure out how to spend their money. Excuse me. The person that's on Google all day searching for symptoms, finding out they have cancer, because that's where every Google search ends, right? There is a real consumer out there, and they value things, right? But what they value is not you getting them to eat more vegetables or walking more steps. Maybe, in the case of chronic care, taking their glucose more, blood pressure, things like that. But in general, that's not what they value. Because they are a consumer, they value the same things you do for anything else you buy. For example, time. Healthcare is unbelievably complex and unbelievably time-consuming, right? So the ability for any of you, although you're in the space, to make things faster, to make things less complex, to make things easier for someone, time is the type of thing people pay for. Right? And when they buy those services, when they value their time, because they can replace those hours spent on the phone or spent doing clipboard things, time is the type of thing. If I tell somebody to eat more vegetables, that's really hard. If I say, I'm going to take away all of that complexity, all that time you spend in that whole hellacious healthcare system, well, people get interested in that. And you see this happening with companies like Oscar Health in New York, a new kind of insurance company, right? You see this happening in One Medical and organizations like that. They're saying, okay, people value time, right? Of course, the other thing they do is they value money, right? You take a high deductible plan, people moving into this, they're moving into exchanges, they're starting to have health savings accounts and FSAs, especially FSAs with them rolling over every year. The consumer has money, right? This utopian vision of, here's a bunch of money, make good healthcare decisions, right? If you told you that there was any industry in the world that said, we're giving the consumer tax-free dollars, right? They get to spend it on a whole limited amount of stuff that's well-defined, right? And they don't really know what to do with it. That's like an entrepreneur's dream, right? You mean they've got money and a limited amount of stuff they can spend it on, and in some cases they have to spend it before the end of the year? Holy crap, right? Wouldn't you die for that market? And yet so few people are actually going after that understanding. And if you don't believe this is market, I will send, is there anybody here? There's not anybody. I will send you the Health Affairs article if you don't want to pay the money for it, that shows that Kaiser patients, 40% of Kaiser patients, and I already gave away the punchline, usually I don't tell people who it is first, stopped getting flu shots, mammograms, all kinds of preventive health when they went on their high deductible plan because they didn't understand the plan, right? So they had no idea what they actually were doing. They thought they had to pay for it. These were free. I'm not saying they had to spend their FSA dollars or their HSA dollars. They're free. But they got moved into this plan. They thought they had to pay for everything. So there's people with money that don't know how to spend it. As entrepreneurs, I'm not sure why any of you are still sitting here. You should be running home and building something for these people, because this is a huge opportunity that's been around since 2003, but only recently as it started to really tip over. And place. Right? Healthcare is awesome at a lot of things. One of the things healthcare is awesome at is building buildings, right? They are really good at place, right? But they're not really good at mobility. They're not really good at telemedicine. They're not really good at being where people are. They're really good at people coming to them, right? But in every other industry, that's changed. Every other industry. You know, whether it's education and MOOCs, whether it's things like LearnVest in finances, right? Everything is about place is going less important, ability to serve you where you are is becoming more important. And yet, drive up and down 880, there's another Kaiser building, right? Good for them, that's awesome, but is that truly the future of what healthcare is going to look like? If you're building things to skate where the puck is going, to make healthcare, hockey and startup analogies at the same time, is that where you want to go? Is that what the service is actually going to look like? Or is the service going to look like every other industry, which is place is going to change dramatically? We're just way behind in our market. This is, if I could only do one, this would have been the one. Solve a real problem. Now, here's the example I'm going to give you. Wearables. okay? I have on 3 of the most important wearables in the history of mankind. 2 of them are for me. I'd argue 1 of them is for you. The 2 for me are my glasses, because I can't see a goddamn thing without them, and my shoes, because my feet would hurt if I had to walk on tar and hot stuff and everything else. They solve a real problem. The 3rd is not my fuel band, it's my pants. That's for you. The bottom line is that this fuel band I have on, I love it. I love it. I've owned every one of them. Daniel Kraft and I joke all the time about who's wearing more. Rachel Kalmar, same thing. What problem does it solve? Really, what problem does it solve? Walk into your doctor, ask them how many steps you should walk, right? There's no standard of care where they're going to go, well, it's Geoff, 11,753 for you, right? Doesn't happen, right? It's great. We're the tip of something, but it doesn't solve a real problem, right? In fact, I would argue when you start seeing this consumer path, this is the consumer electronics companies understanding, hey, look, there is a change going on here, and we got to figure out how to get our brand associated with it. It makes sense, right? It's interesting, right? But unless you're Ernesto Ramirez in the Quantified Self team, and I love Ernesto, right? It's a couple thousand of us, right? Because we haven't solved a real problem. And frankly, the startups that came up here tonight, they had real problems they were solving. Those were really good pitches. They did a really nice job. But most of the folks I see, they're not, right? Still technology for technology's sake. They're not thinking about real use cases because most of the problems in healthcare are pretty boring. But you're going to save a ton of money, you're going to make a ton of money, and you're going to solve real problems. But it's okay to go after those boring problems because most of the time, the super sexy stuff, or at least that you think is super sexy, doesn't solve a real problem. And it'll be sexy for the 10 minutes that you're in TechCrunch, and then the next day, it's going to be really hard to continue to get people to use it and be engaged with it. So I love wearables. I think that a company like Misfit, I think Sunny's very smart. And I think Sunny's approach, Sunny's the CEO of Misfit, Sunny's approach to thinking about it as fashion is very, very smart. But I've told him this, and I will tell you the same thing, right? My shoes became fashionable. Well, let's be honest, my shoes aren't that fashionable, but somebody here has fashion. You have very nice shoes. Your shoes are fashionable, right? After they solved the problem, not before, right? So my eyeglasses, maybe a little fashionable. Right, my pants, Old Navy, not that fashionable, right? They solve a problem, right? And I'm certainly a problem buyer when it comes to clothes, right? So the bottom line is if you don't solve a problem, you can't get to those daily adoptions, those fashion items. So when you think about it, and I don't mean to pick on wearables, like I said, I love them, I use them all the time. Ashka and I were talking in the back about, for me, it's 13,000 steps when I start to see an effect, which tells you I'm eating too much. So, I care about this stuff, but it doesn't solve a real problem for the masses yet, and certainly doesn't integrate much with the healthcare system. There's a million other examples. It's just the easiest one to pick on today. Finally, I want to talk about the fundraising landscape. So I had to have euros earlier because I was going to put dollars now. It is frothy out there. All right, there's a lot of stuff getting funded. And I would argue that most of you will be able to raise money from someone, all right? Look really hard at who you're raising money from. There are a lot of great VCs out there, and there are a lot of people who are dabbling in this space. And the biggest challenge you're going to have is finding someone who will be with you through the long haul, right? The punchline to my last company was, it was 12 years, right? We had people like Lisa Sunin and Silos who were our first investors. We were actually their first investment. And they went on to do amazing things with Definity and Active Health and other companies as well. When you look at people that are in it for the long haul, but there's nobody here that's going to do something really quick, flip it to Facebook, make a huge impact. Maybe somebody will, I shouldn't say nobody, but it's gonna be really hard to do. You have to have people that understand the space and who are dedicated, right? And it's good to find a mixture. It's good to find a mixture of traditional healthcare organizations. Dave and the company at KP Ventures, great organization. Mayo Clinic has a venture arm. There's all kinds of venture dollars out there that are looking to make change that are inside the system. Please, another one of those, please, you're gonna make me cry. Don't tell me how you're disrupting healthcare, you're gonna fix healthcare, right? It takes all of us and a million more people to fix healthcare, right? And the idea that you have to rail against the existing system, most of those folks know they need to change and they want to change. right? And so finding investors and finding partners and finding people inside the system who are willing to invest and work with you, then you don't fall into the pilot trap. So you don't have to just go to Sand Hill Road. In fact, in the best world, you'll find traditional Silicon Valley investors who bring a skill. Maybe it's consumer, maybe it's enterprise, maybe they have some kind of skill outside of healthcare that they can help bring to you, and somebody inside of healthcare. And there's nothing wrong, in fact, I would argue, and it's certainly been my practice, including my latest company, that you're always trying to get both. Because the idea that you're going to change healthcare by yelling at it from the outside of the system, imagine if you ran up to someone's house and they closed all the doors and locked all the windows and you just yelled outside, "I'm going to disrupt your living room." That's what you're saying. You're basically yelling outside someone's house, telling them how you're going to mess up their living room, right? And they're inside the house eating dinner, wondering when the crazy person's going to leave. So it is not only okay, it is something that you have a unique opportunity to go after. The idea that you're going to do this without the existing system by simply ignoring that it exists means you're also not going to hear from the nurses and the doctors and the administrators and all of the people who want change, who actually would sit and work and be part of what you're trying to do. But they're not going to do that if you start by saying, yeah, you guys are idiots. I'm from Silicon Valley. I know what to do, right? It's literally now a mockumentary on HBO, right? Don't fall into that mistake, right? You can change the system working with it. Which leads my shameless plug. I told you it would be obvious. So it is nice that we had a very successful exit, until recently one of the few in digital health. I'm very proud of that team. There's Queso's in the back there. There's somebody who was part of that team here. And the things we accomplished with that company. I'm super proud of it. But the idea that means I get to stand up here and talk to you is somewhat ridiculous if I wasn't living and living what I preach. And so about a year ago, I decided to get back in the game, if you will. I loved my time with Rock Health. I still do as much as I can, although not as much as I would like to. And I love all the startups I'm working with, but I found it to be very disingenuous to stand up here and all of the things I just said, if I'm not actually living them, then I'm just an asshole, right? So tomorrow, which is very serendipitous, I did not know this when I signed up to do this talk, which means I'm going to go home and fix a bunch of things. Tomorrow, we launch Better. And Better is taking all of the ideas of my last company about care coordination inside the enterprise and pushing that to the consumer. And so I'm not here to pitch it. If you want to download and give it 5 stars, that'd be wonderful. But in all honesty, I'm not here to pitch it. Only to say, it's nice I get to stand up here, and it's amazing that what this has become in this organization and this group of people. But I'm just as much one of you and any one of you could be up here as well, and should be. And that's why I want to thank you for listening. I want to be here to answer questions and help you through things, and we can certainly talk through whatever it is you need to talk about, from investment to the FDA to any things I've listed, plus stuff I haven't. You can ask me any question. There's only 2 things I won't do, mostly because there's a video camera there, is I won't tell you what I think of another company with the camera on, and I don't know what the second thing would be, but I'm sure there's something else I wouldn't do, right? So my goal in life is to help folks within digital health, and I hope that with the time that we have left tonight, and whatever time until they kick us out, we get to do that. So thank you. I'm going to guess that everybody knows Omada. Most people probably know Omada. They were in Rock Health V1. They just raised $23 million from Andreessen Horowitz and a few others. Right? And I guess I have to say this, full disclosure, I have a tiny little bit of it. So, and there's also WellDoc that Pat mentioned out of Baltimore. They actually have also, both of these companies are diabetes. Really interesting, the work that they did pre-smartphone and diabetes. WellDoc, I think also Health Hero. These are companies that will, when we come back to the history of telemedicine and remote patient monitoring, digital health, these are the companies that laid the groundwork. And it is unfortunate that WellDoc is in Baltimore because they did not get a lot of the attention they deserve. Single angel investor for 6 years, maybe. Small amount of money, amazing team. They did great stuff. I was actually talking with John Brilliant, who was their old CFO, just before coming over here. Great, great story. If you don't know the WellDoc story and Blue Star, it's worth looking up. And of course, I think nothing but the best of Omada. Really long intro to say, I carefully didn't put the word studies up there, right? I think that pilots, and that's the point about like knowing what you want to learn, and I wish I had articulated that a little better. If you're doing something that's claiming clinical outcomes, you don't have a choice, right? And by the way, on the list of things that make me cry, if you're going to do CHF monitoring and you come and want to tell me that you got a 40% reduction and don't have the words Hawthorne and effect in the next 2 words, I'm going to cry, right? The CHF monitoring is a great example of one where we do get a good effect, but most of it's on the 40% is table stakes. You can get 40% with a telephone and a piece of paper, right? So we've got to raise the bar in these things. But as Pat was mentioning on the clinical outcomes, right, that's where the pilots and the studies, those things are important. You have a clear goal. You have a clear group that you're working with. Kaiser, before they invested in Omada, ran that pilot for a couple months, considerable amount of time, and that led to an investment. That's a clear success story in doing those things, but it wasn't 120 different pilots of a whole bunch of different things. So studies, especially clinical outcomes, a few people are going to get this joke. I won't explain the whole thing, but you know you've made it when Al Lewis attacks you. So when Al Lewis goes after your data, you know you've made it because you've got something worthwhile, you're making a big claim, you've done a bunch of study, and now Al's going to try to debunk it. We all have lived an Al Lewis story. So. But so that is, you can't get enough of that if you're doing anything in clinical data and clinical claims. It's super important to do that. So I want to thank you for letting me better articulate that point, because it's a careful one about the difference between studies and pure pilots. I think, and please don't take this the wrong way. Oh, sorry. Oh my God. I was afraid that 5-hour energy was going a little crazy. So you moved on me there. So I think the question you asked is the wrong question. And I apologize, unless you work for a payer. So I think the problem is that we always start by saying, oh, these are consumers. What are the 2 or 3 ways I can get to them that are OK within healthcare? Why don't we meet consumers like consumers? Procter & Gamble never says, should we do this to a payer, right? But we got to think, I think, bigger and more creative about how we actually go after people. And so one of the things I didn't mention, because payers and employers, my blood will boil and my head will explode. But employers are another great example, right? That we short ourselves as healthcare entrepreneurs by assuming there's only 1 or 2 channels, right? Those channels are not easy. And the idea that employers are any easier than getting to day-to-day consumers, you're going to be the 9,000th startup that went into an employer and probably tried to sell them some fitness-based points solution, right? That's a wellness solution. So the idea that those markets aren't crowded, that's when we limit our thinking to just healthcare. So meeting people where they are, right, and solving their real problems. That's why when I define the problems, let's get me off there, that's ridiculous. Like, I love that guy. He's just the best. I swear to God that I've sold to that guy before. This is, where did it go? Where's the time? Well, now I clicked too many times. Anyway, it's the stuff about time. Here we go. Like time, money, solving a problem, right? So when you start talking about taking complexity out of healthcare, when you start going after time, when you start going after, not price transparency in the way that maybe people think about it today with Castlight, but price transparency in terms of what do I do? How do I buy these things? These are services people are used to buying today in other businesses, right? I mean, somebody mentioned taxes, right? Like, where's the TurboTax for So all these things with healthcare, like what to do within healthcare. Intuit's going to build it if none of us do, and they already are, right? I mean, these are the types of ways about thinking about where people are and solving their problem, but really treating them as consumers. So I don't think about it as just those channels, because when we only empower those channels, we don't really think creatively and outside the box, and they're only going to get us to so many people. And as much as I pick on payers, bottom line is the challenge about payers is you'll get one, right? So United does Audex, everybody else says, well, I got to go build my own, or I got to go buy another company. That's such a competitive and such an actuarial business that it's on a market penetration strategy. It's a get one. Just get one and hope they acquire you, or hope you have another business line somewhere else. And so I think we have to just think more creatively about where we reach consumers. And I think that, we've seen other consumer companies go after that, and we should be mirroring more of those types of companies than limiting ourselves to traditional healthcare. Those will always be there. Employers are always going to be there. Payers are always going to be there. Maybe. But so, that we can always come back to them. But we got to think bigger and more creatively to find those people. Growth within healthcare is still tiny. I'll tell you a story someday about Health Hero and our numbers versus everybody else in the internet early days. I wish I was selling pet food with my sock hand on at the time. But the growth numbers are just totally different, but the impact and the money, we got to think differently in that space. So no, I don't think it's harder, except for one thing that you mentioned specifically. So it is harder to market to a specific doctor. You can thank pharma for that, because it is the rules for how you interact with any particular doctor have changed considerably. And a lot of that has to do with pharmaceutical sales and kind of how that process works. But the idea that healthcare is more resistant to change than other markets, I honestly just don't believe it, because you can go to any of these big companies or governments or education or finance. I mean, we can check down the list of things which we could call uninnovative or unwilling to change. The reality is that healthcare, take the last 100 years of healthcare, right? Healthcare actually changes a lot. Right? The pace of medicine, the pace of new diseases, the pace of all kinds of things compared to other industries often does change considerably, right? Now, that's a bit like saying, is banking resistant to change? Is finance resistant to change? Is education resistant to change? I think anytime you see these big industries, right, and we're talking about huge sectors of the economy, that it's always easy to point out, oh, there's an old organization, or there's an old thing, or there's somebody doing something that's really non-innovative, right? But I think that's true across large businesses. It's very hard to innovate when you're big. Healthcare tends to have a lot of very big, very entrenched organizations, so they smell that way a little bit. But I would argue that, let's take education, right? Has the lecture hall changed dramatically since the Greeks? Probably not. Right? And so, it's still these fundamental things in a lot of these industries, they're ripe for change. But honestly, I think that's the excuse that VCs used for a long time, that it was scary because it feels hard, it's regulated, right? But that's like saying Sarbanes-Oxley was going to kill the IPO, right? Or saying that, I tweeted recently that, TurboTax is going to kill accountants, right? Or any of these things. This idea that it's unwilling to change, I have not seen it to be true. It might be harder sometimes to market specifically to individual doctors, as you mentioned, because of some specific regulatory things about that came out of kind of abuses from pharma sales. But in general, no, I don't find the industry to be that way. And I think that you saw 3 great startups today. I've worked with, like I said, about 200, all the Rock Health startups. We mentioned Omada, WellDoc. I mean, these are companies doing amazing things, Scanadu. I mean, I could keep going on and on, right? These are great companies doing amazing things, and there's lots of people who want to see them be very successful. There are also lots of people who are close to retirement, or they're happy with what they've done. They just came out of a whole bunch of training to become a doctor. Change is just scary, but change is scary for human beings. I don't think that's something that healthcare has a unique corner on. So.